Hello everyone and welcome to Twinsburg Public Library webinars. My name is Carrie Dubiel. I'm the Computer Services Manager here at the library, and our topic today is self-publishing, a brief introduction. As the title slide states, the webinar should be about 30 minutes, maybe a little less, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So, self-publishing, what is it and how long has it been around? As we know, traditional publishers, big companies such as Macmillan and Random House, control most of the publishing that goes on in this country and in other countries. These are the books that we see on the shelves in the library every day. They are distributed by those publishers, and it is a business. However, self-publishing, which is the use of independent publishing to distribute material, has been around for many years. I did some research through Publishers Weekly and found out that Poor Richard's Almanac and Songs of Innocence and Experience, Sense and Sensibility, and Leaves of Grass were all self-published. So that's kind of interesting. I was particularly surprised by Leaves of Grass. So self-publishing has been around for a long time. It's not a new thing, but it has changed a lot in the last probably 10 to 15 years, when in the late 90s, the modern view of self-publishing began. People were able to pay money to have presses print their books on demand. So in traditional publishing, you submit your book, you query your book to an agent, which then submits it to a publisher, or you submit directly to the publisher. There is a vetting process. So somebody has to read your book, somebody has to edit your book in order for it to be published. In self-publishing or independent publishing, at least in the late 90s, you would submit your book and pay money, which is sometimes also known as vanity press, to companies that would print the book, and they would print copies on demand. So in traditional publishing, you're given a contract and there's a print run. So let's say, you have a print run of 10,000 copies. The publisher will print those 10,000 copies, and whatever happens to them happens. So they might get remaindered, which means that they're reduced to a very, very low cost, or they might sell out and do another print run. It all depends on what happens with that publisher. With print on demand, copies of the books are printed when they're needed. So let's say you only sell 15 copies of your book. We're not going to have any other leftover copies laying around, which is great, but it doesn't always work, because it doesn't always work the way that traditional publishers traditional readers expect. So, for example, print-on-demand books cannot be returned to a distributor. There are big distributors, they're called, that they sell to bookstores and libraries. Ingram is one of the big ones that our library orders from. If somebody orders print-on-demand copies from Ingram, they cannot be returned to Ingram. So bookstores are sometimes unwilling to purchase those books. So a lot of times in the new versions of self-publishing, authors were stuck with the bill. Authors were paying the vanity presses, and then they'd get stuck with all these boxes of books in their basements, and it would end up being a huge investment and not always the best for them. However, as we've seen, self-publishing does have a long history, and it can be profitable. And now, from the 2000s on, we are in a completely different age from the print-on-demand. I know people who did the print-on-demand in the 90s, and it was difficult for them. Now that we have the internet, of course, things have changed again. In the early 2000s, Stephen King was the first author to release a book on his own website and make it available for everyone. Now we have more and more people blogging, so there's lots and lots of content for free, as you know, and there are different websites like Wattpad, which is a website where people can go on and post different stories that they're currently writing. So there's lots of ways to distribute content to people who want to read it without having to make a huge investment in something like print on demand. So it's very different. Starting in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I guess we'll call it, we now are seeing the rise of certain companies that not only will help you publish electronically, they'll also help you distribute your print-on-demand copies. So Smashwords, Amazon, BookBaby are just 3 of those. They will help you put together a file that can now be published not just to websites but to ebook distributors. So you can create a book, publish it on Amazon, charge $1, $2 for it, and you can make a profit. You can also do your print-on-demand books through them, and there's less upfront costs for those than there were with the vanity presses of the 90s. So the environment for self-publishing is much better than it was 10 to 20 years ago. However, there are still a lot of factors to consider, and that's what we're going to go into next. So here's some statistics. Since 2011, when self-publishing this way became a new trend, we had 391,000 books self-published in 2012. We do not have the statistics for 2013 yet. That should be coming out fairly soon, but you can see that it was a 59% increase over 2011. Despite the renaissance in self-publishing, because there are so many self-published books out there and marketing is very, very important, most self-published books do not sell well. The other thing is that we talked about earlier is that with traditional publishing there is a vetting process. Someone has to read the book and pronounce it good. With self-published books, that's not necessarily the case. So I could write something, throw it up on the internet, and no one may have looked at it. So there could be grammatical errors, there could be poor writing. So there's a lot of different factors involved in that. Those books might not have the same discoverability that traditionally published books do. They're not in libraries, so you don't hear about them. The word of mouth isn't there, so those books do not sell as well as the ones you hear about. For example, 50 Shades of Grey was self-published. That book started as fan fiction. Fan fiction is a type of fiction, fan fiction is a type of fiction that authors write. It's exactly what it is. It's fiction about different TV series or movies where the universe is already established. The author doesn't have to create the characters. So for example, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Trek, Doctor Who, many books like 50 Shades of Grey started out as fan fiction and were then adapted. So 50 Shades of Grey was a Twilight fan fiction. So because of the connection to Twilight, which was already very popular, the book became popular, although it wasn't well written. It was then moved on to Random House, where it was then professionally edited, and it then got an even broader audience there. Most popular price points for self-published books, 99 cents to $2.99. So most self-published books, for the ebook at least, are not very expensive. You might charge a little bit more for the print-on-demand copy. This is one thing that's very important, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons to self-publishing next. Despite the lower price of the ebook, self-published authors do yield more overall per book. So for example, when someone is traditionally published, their ebook might cost $6 or $12 or whatever, but they might only see a few dollars of that because there's so much overhead that goes into traditionally publishing. Self-published authors generally get 30 to 70% of what they charge for their books, and they do have more control over what to charge for their books. So self-publishing can be lucrative, it just has to be done in a particular way, and we're going to talk about that too. So why would you choose to self-publish your book? And I'm talking here about a novel, a novella, a short story. Pretty much anything can be self-published, but how do we do it? And why? Control. I mentioned that in the previous slide. You control everything about self-publishing. So if you are a control freak, you might consider this because you create the cover art, you set the price, and you decide what goes into that book. As I mentioned before, you don't have a traditional editor, but you could have a traditional editor. You could hire somebody. You could choose to invest what you want in your book. So there's a lot of resources out there that you can use to research all of these different things. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but when you're first making the decision, that's a good thing to think about, is that control. If you're the kind of person who does not want to cede to a big company, then it's a good possibility that this might work for you. Specialized subject matter. So let's say your book is a family history and only your family is going to read it. There's not a whole lot of advantage in trying to sell that to a traditional publisher, because chances are, if there's not a broad audience for it, they're not going to take it. Same thing with a business-related publication. At the library, we have put out our own publications, a few different things, our computer classes, handbooks. We had a cookbook that we did a few years ago. Those types of things would not have done well in the traditional market. So self-publishing gave us an outlet, a way to create that content so that our patrons could have it. Do you have an independent mindset? Are you willing to take risks? Are you willing to stick your neck out? And are you willing to fail? Because if you self-publish, as we mentioned in the last slide, chances are you're not going to do so well. So you need to be able to assess the market, try new things, do anything you can to try and get this book out there. At the same time, you also have to be, and this is not on the slide, but you do have to be humble. You do have to recognize that if people aren't reading your book, it could be a reflection of the quality of your book, not necessarily your marketing. So you have to be able to think three-dimensionally about your work and be critical and figure out why your book isn't working for your audiences. We get a lot of people at the library who want their book in the library, but because they're self-published, they need to go the extra mile to convince us that it fits into our collection of development policy, because it's not vetted by a traditional publisher, we need to be able to assess the quality of it. And so you need to be able to address that when you're talking about your book to a potential audience. Finally, self-publishing is a much shorter time frame from the book to the shelf. So if you've written the book, you can usually get it out on the shelf within a few months, if not less, if you're very good at the self-publishing process and if you know people who can help you. This is probably a good option for some writers who are already traditionally published and they have the name recognition that comes with it. I personally, as a writer, would love to have a traditional contract and then be able to publish my own work on my own, because I feel like that would give me control over certain things, but at the same time having a traditional publisher would give me that sort of name recognition, and I would be able to get books out more quickly to my readers. Hopefully that right now that's a dream. Hopefully one day that will happen, but it is something to consider if you're thinking about self-publishing. So this is the basic timeline. I'm not going to go into every specific detail about it, although you certainly could. You could have an entire 5-hour webinar probably on all of these things. But just to give you a basic overview of how this works. Writing the book is the most important thing. I think this is the most important thing for everybody who's writing, traditional or not. Got to get that book shined and polished and have it be worth reading. I mentioned before that professional edits are important. If you have the money to invest in a professional editor, it's always a good idea. You might be able to barter. I have some friends that I edit their book for them. I'm not a professional editor, but I am a pretty decent reader, and in return they read my book. You might want to even go the extra mile if you can afford it, but if not, if you can work out the barter system with a critique group, there are lots of resources for new authors out there. I am the library liaison for a group called Sisters in Crime, which is a great professional network for mystery readers and writers, and it's not just women, it's also men. So there are lots of resources like that out there. It's definitely worth a look into that. So you really got to spend a lot of time, especially if it's a first novel. You want to get that book into shape, get it as good as you can get it. Finally, when you feel like the book is ready, you want to choose a distributor. Decide, is the book going to be ebook only, or is it going to be, generally you don't want it to be just print. You're going to lose a lot of readers that way. So you definitely want to make it an ebook. But do you want to make it an exclusive ebook, or do you also want to create a print copy? Excuse me. Personally, the vanity presses that I mentioned, they do still exist. They're out there. But the best way to do it without overhead is to use a company like Amazon's CreateSpace, that you can create the book, or on, Lulu.com is another one. You create the book, you print it on demand, and then you don't have to pay the overhead for more copies than you need if you're going to do print. Smashwords is a good distributor for e-media. You go in, you format your file, which we'll talk about on the next step. And then Amazon is often separate. So you have to upload your file to Smashwords, and then you upload it to Amazon separately, and then you have your book on Kindle, Nook, all of the different e-media marketplaces that are out there. Getting a cover is another important part of the process. You need a professional looking cover. That's just a fact of the process. People, even in the online environment, are looking at the covers. If the cover is attractive to them, they're going to look at the book. I know we say we never should judge a book by the cover, but we do. It's just like any sort of other marketing. You want your graphics to look good. You want your name to be recognizable as the person who does a very good professional cover. There are resources for that. As I mentioned, Smashwords is a good place to look for people who do covers. If you know other people who are self-published, that's also a good way to go. Just networking with people. If you find a book online that you like the cover and it's self-published, see if you can contact the author and find out who did their cover. Formatting the book for the distributor, this is the techie part. You need to make the Word file into a very specific format, which you can go to smashwords.com and it will explain how you need to format that book so that it looks good and that it's available for Amazon and Smashwords. You upload it to both of those websites, and then it takes a few days for it to get into the system. And then once the book is available on the system, then you can come up with a date to launch the book, which is the next step in the process, launching the book. There are a lot of different tools and resources to decide how you want to launch the book, and that all goes into marketing. So what are you going to do to get the book out there? There are lots and lots and lots and lots of different things you can do, and some ways, really there's no proven way to make sure people find out about the book, but generally if it's an ebook, online marketing is the best way to go. Sometimes, as I mentioned, authors come to the library and see if they can do a book signing, but sometimes that's not always possible, especially if you're self-published. So you do have some challenges you need to face. While you're marketing, you should be writing the next book, because people who read ebooks love content. They want more and more things. And so it's a challenge. You've got to do a lot. So that leads us to the next slide. What are the challenges? So you have to do all of the legwork yourself. You do not have a publicist. You do not have an assistant, unless you're rich and you can afford to do that. If you do, again, hire somebody, you do have to put the financial investment into it. So you're on top of this project. It's all you, and generally you're not getting paid for it unless you sell well. So you're putting time investment, you're putting money investment into something that you're not sure you're going to get a clear reward. So that's another point on the list. Your financial investment, it may be difficult to find out, both with money and time, how much you're going to put into this project. You might have to think about why are you doing this? Do you want readers? And if you do want readers, what are you going to do to get your readers? Technology hurdles, you must be very proficient with the web and social media. Facebook, you need to, Twitter, Pinterest, whatever, you need to be on all these different websites, finding out what the best ways to get into all of these different markets. You need to be on top of that. You also need to be proficient with Microsoft Word if you're going to format your book yourself. You might not necessarily do that. You might hire somebody to do that, but if you don't have the money to do that, you might have to just do this all yourself with your own sweat. Mention marketing, it's always changing. The market's constantly changing. And again, you're going to face some resistance. There is still some, even though it's exploded in the last few years, there is still some stigma associated with self-publishing with bookstores and libraries. And again, that goes back to not being able to sell the book or return the book if it doesn't sell. And libraries not being sure if they want to collect this book, if they want to have a book signing. How does a library know if your book signing is going to do well? If your book isn't traditionally published, how can the library guarantee that you're going to be bringing patrons into the library? So you have to come up with some sort of spin, and you have to really be an authentic person. You have to show that your product is good and that you want readers and that you want a way to connect with them. And again, as I mentioned, the constantly changing market, we don't know, in 5 years, everybody could be reading only self-published books, and then we could be stuck here at the library scrambling to do things in a new way. Another hurdle is that sometimes with ebooks, libraries can't get them. Even with traditional publishers, we are limited by what we can get. So with self-published ebooks, sometimes it's even more difficult to get them into us. So you might be facing a hurdle that even the library can't do anything about. So there's a lot to think about with that. I personally have thought about this quite a lot over the years as I work as both a librarian and a writer. And self-publishing is definitely something I want to do someday, but I'm not sure if now is the right time. And so I've done a lot of research on it, but we'll see what happens, is all I'm going to say. So we've reached most of the end of the content. Some further reading. I'm sure this is just enough to give you a taste of what it's like. A book that I read called The Naked Truth About Self-Publishing. It's available on Kindle. I think it's $4.99. It's a group of authors who are independent and they're self-published, and they're people who have done very, very well. So they're a good, even though it's not very realistic because most of us aren't going to do as well as those people, you can at least read those essays and see what you think, is this something you want to do? Mark Coker, the founder of Smashwords, is out there. He's writing articles. He's writing books. Some of his books are free on Amazon, so it's worth a try reading some of his stuff because he will get you the info you need. Generally, smashwords.com is also a very good place to look. You can read all of the guidelines. They have a formatting guide that you can download. They have a list of people that will do some of these different things for you. So it's definitely worth looking at that. Two other very popular books that are on Amazon are Write, Publish, Repeat and Let's Get Visible, How to Get Noticed and Sell More Books. Those ones are very popular. There's the Ally website, the Alliance of Independent Authors. They have a different blog post every day with different author experiences, different strategies to get your book out there, ways to advertise, different email lists that you can get on, so that's pretty cool. And then there's also the Kindle boards, which are, there's lots of stuff on Kindle boards, but there is a writer's room where they talk about getting your books onto Amazon Kindle and CreateSpace and different tips and tricks and tactics. So that's a good place to look if you're thinking about dipping a toe into these waters. So that is it. If you have any questions, go ahead and either type them into the chat box or use the question feature. Well, I do not see any questions, so I think we'll go ahead and end. Thank you for being a part of the webinar today, and we hope to see you on a future webinar.